The man I trusted most was the one building the door for our enemies to walk through. And the worst part? He was doing it with a smile on his face, standing right beside me every single day. My name is Arjun. I am the crown prince of Lakshmipura, a kingdom my father built with his bare hands and his whole life's blood. I grew up watching him rule with patience, with mercy, with a kind of quiet dignity that most men can only pretend to have. The people of our kingdom loved him. And I loved him more than I have ever loved anyone. But love, I would learn, is exactly what makes you blind. When I returned from years of study at the Gurukul, I came back ready. Ready to serve. Ready to learn at my father's side before the weight of the crown eventually passed to my shoulders. I wasn't in a hurry. A kingdom is not something you rush into. It is something you earn, slowly, the way you earn anything that truly matters. My father, Maharaj Suryawardhan, was aging. I could see it in his eyes, a tiredness that wasn't sadness, but something closer to completion. He had poured everything into this kingdom, into this people, and he was ready to rest. To walk into the forest, into prayer, into the silence that follows a life fully lived. I understood. But I also knew I wasn't ready to carry this alone. Not yet. Then the reports started coming in. Thefts. Robberies. People across the kingdom waking up to find their valuables gone, their homes ransacked, their sense of safety shattered. My father's heart broke a little every time a new complaint arrived. He was a man who measured his reign by his people's peace. And that peace was fracturing. And then, as if the thefts weren't enough, came the intelligence report that changed everything. King Vijay Singh, the ruler of our neighboring kingdom, was preparing to attack us. Waiting for the right moment. Watching for the perfect crack in our walls to pour his army through. I remember reading that report and feeling something cold settle into my chest. Not fear exactly. Something worse. The feeling you get when you realize the danger is closer than you thought, and the time is shorter than you hoped. My father turned to me with the weight of the world in his eyes. "Arjun," he said. "What do we do?" I told him we needed to act. Fast. But smart. The problem was money. Expanding our military, buying weapons, training new soldiers. All of it cost more than our treasury could currently hold. And that was precisely when the Sadhu arrived. He walked into our royal court like he owned it. Calm. Confident. The kind of man who makes a room go quiet just by entering it. He claimed to be a holy man of great spiritual power, said he could see what others couldn't, know what others didn't. And the people believed him, because he had already proven himself in the streets and villages of our kingdom. He had told ordinary citizens where their ancestors had buried treasure, and when they dug in those exact spots, they found it. Gold coins. Real ones. The court buzzed with excitement. Even my father leaned forward on his throne. The Sadhu looked at my father with those steady, unreadable eyes and said, "Maharaj, I know you are troubled by the threat of your enemy. I know your treasury lacks the funds to strengthen your army. But do not despair. Your ancestors left behind an enormous hidden treasure, buried beneath the main gate of your city. Dig there, and you will find gold beyond what you can imagine." The room erupted. Ministers exchanged glances of disbelief and hope. Even our commander, our Senapati, a man who had served our kingdom for decades, a man my father trusted like a brother, nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. I stayed silent. Because something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, the way you feel a storm before the sky has given any sign of it. Think about what the sadhu was actually asking. He wanted us to destroy the main gate of our city. The one gate. The strongest structure standing between our kingdom and the outside world. The gate that had held for generations, that had turned back raids and invasions and threats that history had long since forgotten. And he wanted us to tear it down to dig for gold. I looked around the room at all these men nodding, calculating, already dreaming of the wealth beneath that stone. And I thought, if that gate comes down, Vijay Singh doesn't need a strategy anymore. He just needs to ride forward. I raised my hand. Give me 1 week, I said quietly. Before any decision is made. 1 week. My father agreed. The Senapati looked frustrated. The sadhu smiled and bowed and left the court. That smile. I keep coming back to that smile. It didn't belong to a holy man. It belonged to someone who had already won. I went that same night to find Kamal. Kamal had been my closest friend since we were children. We had grown up wrestling in the palace gardens, stealing fruit from the kitchen, staying up late and talking about everything boys talk about when they think the world belongs to them. He was now my father's most trusted personal guard. Steady, sharp, fiercely loyal in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. In a world full of calculated loyalty, Kamal's was the genuine kind. I needed someone I could trust completely. And there was only one of those. I told him my plan. His eyes narrowed. He listened. Then he nodded. We changed into plain clothes, simple village garments, nothing that would mark us as anyone worth noticing, and I led him to his own house. I took out a pouch of 1,000 gold coins and handed it to him. Bury this, I said. Right here. In your own home. Then go to the sadhu tomorrow morning and tell him your grandmother always said your ancestors were wealthy. Tell him you believe they left treasure somewhere. See what he tells you. Kamal stared at me for a long moment. Then he understood. You want to see if he tells me where I actually buried it. Or if he tells you somewhere else entirely. He buried the coins. And the next morning, he went to the sadhu. I waited in the palace, turning the problem over in my mind like a stone. I kept thinking about the Senapati. The way he had pushed for the gate to be torn down. The way he had nodded when the sadhu spoke. The way he had looked almost impatient when I asked for a week's delay. This was a man who had served our kingdom for 30 years. A man my father had promoted, celebrated, trusted with his life. Was I wrong to suspect him? Was I letting paranoia poison my judgment? I decided the only way to know was to watch. That night, Kamal came back and told me what the sadhu had said. Not the place where we had buried the gold. A completely different location. Somewhere near a tree at the front of Kamal's property. A spot chosen to seem believable, authentic, ancestral. But not the real spot. Not where the coins actually were. Which meant the sadhu hadn't known where Kamal buried anything. He was guessing. He was fabricating. He was a fraud. But a fraud in service of whom? I told Kamal we needed to watch the sadhu's cottage that night. Both of us. Hidden. Silent. Patient. I don't think either of us was ready for what we saw. A figure moved through the darkness toward the sadhu's cottage. Careful steps. Practiced silence. The body language of someone who had made this kind of late-night visit many times before. When the figure stepped briefly into a shaft of moonlight, I felt Kamal's arm tighten beside me. It was the Senapoti's most trusted aide. His right hand. The man who never left his side. We watched him enter the cottage. And then we listened. The walls were thin. The night was still. "How far has the plan progressed?" the aide asked. The Sadhu's voice came back smooth and satisfied. The king was ready to tear down the gate. It was the prince who delayed things. But it won't matter. Another week and the gate will come down, the digging will start, and when they find nothing, the wall will already be open. Vijay Singh's army will be at the border by then. And the Senapati? Tell him to be patient. Once Vijay Singh takes Lakshmipura, the Senapati will be given the throne. That was the agreement. That has always been the agreement. I stopped breathing. 30 years. 30 years this man had eaten at our table, stood beside my father, called himself a protector of our kingdom. And for how long had he been selling us? Planning this. Waiting for exactly the right moment to hollow us out from the inside. I felt Kamal's hand on my shoulder. He could feel me shaking. Whether it was rage or grief, I still couldn't tell you. I wanted to storm in right then. I wanted to drag both of them into the courtyard and expose them in front of everyone. I wanted the Senapati to see my face when he realized it was over. But I had learned something from my father, something I had almost forgotten in that moment of fury. He always said, "A wise king doesn't strike when he is angry. He strikes when he is certain." I was certain. But I needed more. I pulled Kamal back into the shadows and whispered, "Not tonight. Tomorrow night. We come back with the king. And we bring soldiers." Kamal nodded. His jaw was tight. His eyes were calm the way a person's eyes go calm when they have crossed from shock into purpose. The next night, we returned. My father came with us, disguised, surrounded by soldiers hidden at a distance. I had told him everything that afternoon. I had watched the color leave his face as I spoke. I had watched something break in him, quietly, the way old wood cracks under weight it was never meant to hold. He said nothing when I finished. He just stood up and said, "Show me." We didn't have to wait long. The Senapati himself came to the cottage that night. No aid this time. He came personally, because the plan was almost complete and he wanted to be there for the final confirmation. We heard every word. When we had enough, when there was no room left for doubt, no argument left for innocence, my father stepped out of the darkness. I will never forget the Senapati's face. The color. The disbelief. The fraction of a second where he almost tried to speak, to explain, to construct some story that could save him. And then the realization that there was nothing left to construct. "I trusted you," my father said. Just that. 3 words, but each one landed like a stone. Kamal's soldiers moved in. Both men, the Senapati and the fraudulent Sadhu, were taken into custody before either of them could run or fight or beg. The court the next morning was unlike anything Lakshmipura had seen in a generation. Every minister, every noble, every advisor gathered in silence to hear the truth laid out in full. The conspiracy exposed. The gate that had almost been destroyed. The army that had been waiting just beyond our borders, patient as wolves, for the wall to fall. The Senapati was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. The Sadhu received the same. And a message was sent to King Vijay Singh, calm, direct, final, informing him that his plan had failed, that his spy was caught, and that Lakshmipura was watching. Vijay Singh never attacked. When you lose the element of surprise, when your infiltration is exposed and your man is imprisoned, the calculation changes. He had been counting on a kingdom with its gates torn open. Instead, he was facing a kingdom that had just discovered exactly how far its enemies would go and had started preparing accordingly. My father held a ceremony a week later. He summoned the entire court. He spoke about loyalty, about wisdom, about the difference between the advisor who tells you what you want to hear and the one who tells you what you need to know. Then he turned to me. "I have been waiting," he said, "for the moment I would know my son was ready to hold this kingdom. I thought I would know it by his age, or his education, or the years he had spent learning at my side." He paused. "But a man shows you who he is in the moment everything is at stake. And I have seen my son. He offered me the throne that day. I asked for more time. Not because I was afraid, but because there was still work to do. The military needed strengthening. The kingdom needed rebuilding after the fear those thefts had caused. Trust needed to be repaired in the streets before it could be celebrated in the palace." My father smiled when I said that. The smile of a man who finally knows he can rest. And then I asked for one more thing. I asked that Kamal be named the new Senapati. The court murmured. A few eyebrows went up. He was young. He was not of high birth. He was not the obvious choice. I looked at my father and said, "A kingdom rises or falls on the loyalty of the people who stand closest to its center. I have seen, this past week, what betrayal can do from the inside. I will not make that mistake again. Kamal has proven, at the moment it mattered most, exactly who he is. I know no better qualification for this post than that." My father nodded. The court went silent. And then, one by one, the ministers began to bow. There is something I think about now, late at night when the palace is quiet and the kingdom is asleep. I think about the Sadhu, not with anger, but with something stranger. Curiosity, almost. He had traveled through our kingdom for weeks, spinning his web, collecting trust, building a con so carefully layered that even intelligent men had believed it completely. And he was undone not by a soldier, not by a spy, not by superior military intelligence. He was undone by a young prince who noticed a smile that didn't belong on a holy man's face. Details. That is what betrayal always comes down to. The small things that don't fit. The pause that lasts half a second too long. The enthusiasm that shows up in exactly the wrong places. I had almost missed it. I had been sitting in that court, watching the excitement build, and something quiet inside me said, "Wait." I have thought many times since then about what would have happened if I hadn't listened to that quiet voice. If I had let the excitement carry me along with everyone else. If I had nodded and smiled and sent the workers to tear down the gate in the morning. We would have lost everything. The kingdom my father had built over a lifetime. The people who trusted us to protect them. The peace that ordinary families woke up to each morning without even realizing how precious it was. All of it, gone. Because one man's greed had been patient enough to wait 30 years for its moment. That is the thing about betrayal from the inside. It doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, in the dark, in the places where no one is looking. And by the time you see it, it's usually already too late. Unless you are paying attention. Unless you trust your instincts when everyone around you is too dazzled to think clearly. Unless you have one person beside you, just one, whose loyalty is not a calculation but a fact. I named Kamal my Senapati. My father walked into the forest he had always dreamed of, lighter than I had ever seen him. And I took my seat on the throne of Lakshmipura, not with triumph, not with ceremony burning in my chest, but with something quieter and more permanent. Responsibility. And the knowledge of what it actually costs. A kingdom is not a crown. It is not a ceremony or a title or a palace. It is a promise made to every person who sleeps inside its walls, trusting that someone, somewhere, is staying awake so they don't have to. I had been given that promise to carry. And I had learned, in the hardest possible way, that the most dangerous threat to any kingdom is never the army waiting at the gate. It is always the man already standing inside it.